Hello, 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 and happy Juneteenth. Welcome to Texas Public Radio for the latest in the installment of a Great Essay series. This is a series where it's a community conversation about what makes San Antonio great. This is the second in a series, like I said, that explores the city of gastronomy in collaboration with the City of San Antonio World Heritage Office. We looked at Tex-Mex in April, and soon we'll explore the Polish influence on the cuisine of Texas and the Native American influences. I want to thank Colleen Swain at the World Heritage Office for their support and partnership for tonight's event. The World Heritage Office helps promote that San Antonio has been designated a city of gastronomy by the UNESCO Creative Cities. You can learn more about the rich culinary history and our chef ambassadors at sacityofgastronomy.org. We also had the pleasure of collaborating with the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum for this panel. I want to thank Deborah Omowale-Jarman, the CEO, and Heather Williams, and all the staff and stakeholders there who have been significant contributors to tonight's conversation. And thank you to our other sponsors for Great Essay and events like this, including Frost and HEB. All right, Now, to get the conversation started, we wanted to start with a poem from Darrell the Green Lantern Pittman. He is a husband, father of 3, grandfather of 4, retired educator, and poet. He loves poetry, art galleries, music, and anything science fiction. He would also like to publicly thank whoever decided to butter the pecans before putting them into the ice cream.
Good evening. As she said, I'm Darrell Pittman, aka the Green Lantern. Duh. D-A, the Green Lantern. Sometimes I am so busy projecting an image society demands, I forget who I am and what is important. 3 days ago, I realized I had forgotten who I was and was lost. But then, when I went to a family barbecue, I found myself in the way that my beer sipping, white towel round the neck wearing favorite uncles be grilling. I found myself in the fluffy waves of the homemade egg white whipped meringue of my auntie's banana pudding. I found myself in the squinty-eyed laughter of Big Mama's smile as she yelled to the back of the kitchen, "Y'all stop arguing over my collard greens. There's plenty more in that big pot on the counter." I found myself as I watched my sister pour just a little more of pickle juice into the potato salad before stirring. I smiled when I recognized myself in my great-nephew's question, "Gigi, did you bring your macaroni and cheese?" Seeing, being part of that love, that family love, I found myself and was whole. Food tastes better with family and laughter, and that is important. I found myself when I saw my brother-in-law pile and balance 3 plates of food onto 1 plate. There was turkey and a slab of barbecue pork ribs. There was chicken drumsticks, which all the kids called dibs. There was spicy sausage and 1 last chicken thigh part. But old Pa, he's still the one that sucks neck bone like art. You got your stuffing or dressing and mashed potatoes so nice, and all of the dishes that contain some rice. You got broccoli cheese and rice, black-eyed peas and rice, red beans and rice, gravy and rice, butter and rice. Well, we don't actually use butter because of that price, but we do use margarine, and that's quite nice. But nobody in my family sprinkles sugar on their rice. You got your macaroni and cheese and collard greens with fat back, and the cornbread and white bread or 3-bump roll is at the top of the stack. Brother-in-law be balancing. At every gathering, we feast and laugh and exaggerate stories like how spouses and significant others couldn't live without us, only to be reminded by Gran or Pawpaw or Grandma Ola that there is strength in truth. Boy, stop that lying. You know your nose was wide open for that gal. Family eruptions and laughter are loud, joyfully loud. Folks be eating and laughing and telling stories of histories and laughter that was almost lost. I found myself and was whole. Yet quietly, over the centuries, through the Middle Passage, through slavery, through Jim Crow, and all the way up until today, it has been through fellowship and celebration of family and communal meals that has sustained us. And when I say family food sustains us, sustains us, sustains us is a metaphor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that poem. I think we should just jump right into the panel now. That was such a beautiful start. First, I'm going to ask each of you how you guys celebrate Juneteenth, but I'm going to give you your introduction. So first, we have Chef VickieV. At the end, Victoria Taylor is an executive sous chef who was recently promoted to white coat status. She started cooking at 8. She's 12 now, and now has her own catering company called Chef VickieV. Welcome, Chef. And how do you celebrate Juneteenth?
I celebrate Juneteenth by like barbecuing and like helping the community and doing plate sales.
I love that. I love that. What do you normally eat at Juneteenth?
Well, during Juneteenth, I barbecue and I'll do like some macaroni and cheese with some collard greens and a couple desserts.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Chef. We also have Adrian Lipscombe on the panel, working on the 40 Acres Project, whose mission is to preserve the legacy of Black agriculture and foodways by purchasing land for Black farmers to practice traditional agriculture methods. I'm tongue-tied today. Provide resources for the food industry, create education and opportunities. Welcome.
Hi, how are y'all doing tonight? And your question?
Oh, yeah. How do you celebrate Juneteenth?
So I'm originally from San Antonio, so Juneteenth has been in my family for a very long time. Usually, especially when I was younger, you would see for Juneteenth or even around Independence Day was usually our family reunions. That's when we did get together. How I celebrate now is I used to work in a cubicle, and that day was a Black holiday, even before people really even knew exactly what it was. So I always took that day off for rest. And in my household, same type of thing. It was barbecue or fried chicken. We usually don't fry too much chicken in right after the spring. So this is when we would do it. And, sweet potato pie, banana pudding. I can keep going on, cornbread. keep going, greens, turkey necks, smoked turkey necks, got the brisket, got the beef rib, got the hot guts, got it all, right? So we ate and we celebrated being together.
We also have Marcus Baskerville on the panel. He is co-owner of Weathered Souls Brewing Company. Marcus has received numerous awards and accolades, including San Antonio's Brewery of the Year 5 times running. 2019 Best 33 Stouts in the World, Wine Enthusiasts 40 Under 40, Top Tastemakers in 2020, Craft Beer and Brewing's 2020 Breakout Brewer, the 2020 Best Brewery in the U.S., and many, many more. Welcome, Marcus, and how do you celebrate Juneteenth?
How's everybody doing today? Thank you for having me today. So for me, what's interesting is I'm originally from California, and I've been in San Antonio now for about 10 and a half years. So being said that, growing up in Northern California, Juneteenth wasn't something that was heavily celebrated. Fully aware of what Juneteenth was, but it wasn't something that was very much highlighted where we were. Now, which is different, for about the last 15 years, they've had parades in like Sacramento and stuff like that. But since I'm here, I've had the enjoyment of participating in quite a bit of Juneteenth things. So for me, how I celebrate at this point is I typically barbecue. barbecue, collard greens, mac and cheese, greens, cornbread, that type of stuff. Like she said, sometimes a little bit of fried chicken. But yeah, and then on top of that, being that we have the brewery because of Black is Beautiful, so since 2020, we've done an annual release on Juneteenth and then supported the 100 Black men of San Antonio with proceeds of that release going to them to support them.
And lastly, but not least, we have Adrian Miller on the panel as well. He's a soul food scholar. Adrian is also a food writer, a James Beard Award winner, and an attorney, and most importantly, a certified barbecue judge. Adrian is featured in the Netflix hit High on the Hog, How African American Cuisine Transformed America. Welcome, and how do you celebrate Juneteenth?
No, good to be here. So what people don't know is that I'm from Denver, Colorado, and Colorado had the biggest Juneteenth celebration outside of Texas for a long time. So yeah, so yes, there are Black people in Colorado. And despite what you've heard, Colorado is very diverse. We have a lot of different kinds of white people. So I just couldn't resist. It was right there. So Juneteenth was not a home celebration for us. We would go to the public celebration. And so what I remember most about Juneteenth is the big turkey legs that the local Black radio station owner would sell. Dr. Daddio is his name. So I remember that with Juneteenth. But since 2021, I have celebrated Juneteenth by traveling around the country and talking about Juneteenth. So I've been hired to come out and share the good news of Juneteenth with the community. So this coming Monday, I will be in Virginia talking about Juneteenth.
Now, I wanted to ask you how each of you celebrated Juneteenth and what you eat, because I think when people think about Black food, African American food, they have one thing in mind, and we heard a plethora of dishes and meals. So I want to start with you, Adrian Miller. How does what you heard in the menus from our various panelists differ from traditional celebration?
So I think it's pretty consistent. I think the one thing that unites Juneteenth menus is it has to be some color red involved. And the reason why is because red symbolizes the blood shed by our enslaved ancestors. So it's usually barbecue, watermelon, and then some kind of red drink. And for those who don't know, in soul food culture, red is a color and a flavor. So Black people, we don't get caught up in whether it's cherry or strawberry or has hints of cranberry. It's just red. And put outside your mind what Dave Chappelle said about purple drink and what youngins are saying about blue and other colors. You know, like I said wrote in my book on soul food, I do believe the children are our future, that we should teach them well and let them lead the way, but not on drinks because they're messing it up. It's got to be red.
Now, how do we define soul food and Southern food? Adrian Lipscombe.
Why did I get the difficult question?
I know. Serve it up.
You know, for me, I have a stance about what soul food is versus what Southern food is. And soul food, you really saw that really that started coming out back into the 60s, the civil rights, where you start seeing the soul like part of being the soul food, but also within the case of who made the food and how that food made you feel, right? So it kind of goes back like if an Italian family had their nanny making the food, is that considered soul food? I believe so. I believe it has that stake on it is a type of soul food, but it runs really deep in our culture, our African American culture of us holding as soul food. So sitting at my grandmother's table on Sunday or just watching her put everything together before we go to church, that was part of my soul food. And so when you ate it and you felt it in your soul of being there with your family, that to me is equal what soul food is. It's the action of what it does to you, not that you made that food. Because I can go to church as chicken and it may not be soul food. You know what I'm saying? It definitely has to be the relationship of who made it. Because to me, you can't be angry when you eating certain things.
What if it's nasty, though?
No, that's different. But I'm just saying, like, I used to say you couldn't be angry if you eating fried chicken. Like, you couldn't be angry if you eating a good barbecue rib. You know, like, So it's like, what is intake into you and that emotion and that feeling on who made that food? If my grandmother made that and I'm sitting at that table, to me, you know, she made that for me, to nourish my body, to nourish my mind. And also that storytelling that goes with that dish. I'm learning and I'm observing, and that becomes part of my soul.
If I can just add one more layer to that.
Absolutely.
First of all, I forgot the red dessert of red velvet cakes or cupcakes.
I'm going to argue with you about that red
Well,
velvet
it's
cake.
colored red.
No, we'll
Okay.
argue. We'll
I
argue
mean,
later.
if cobblers fit into this as well, like a cherry cobbler or
Peach
cobbler. I mean,
cobbler.
yes.
But if you want to be consistent with the theme. The only thing I will add to that is I argue that soul food is the food that African American migrants took out of the South and transplanted in other parts of the country. Because from my understanding, in the South, people don't really call it soul food that much. It's just dinner or, you know, home cooking or country cooking. So I think soul food has grown as a term, but I think initially it was kind of that movement out of the South and giving it a name once it left the South.
I do want to follow up on that, but I forgot to mention this is also an interactive conversation. So please, if you have a question or a food memory, you want to ask one of our fantastic panelists something, we have 2 mics right here. So I just ask that you keep it as concise as possible since we do only have an hour. But please feel free to come up and ask a question. Oh, yeah, please
Grab a
come to
mic.
mic. First, what's your name?
I'm Deborah, so it really wasn't that serious. I just wanted to know, how do you celebrate Juneteenth and what do you eat?
Thank you so much for asking. So I am not a native Texan. I'm a military brat, moved here in 2016, and I believe that was the first year I celebrated Juneteenth. And I kid you not, that was the second time I saw that many Black people in one place. But it was wonderful, and there was a lot of barbecue, and there was a lot of barbecue chicken. And now what we're going to do this year, I think we're going to do a red velvet cake, for sure. Yes.
I'm going to argue about this cake.
Controversy.
Well, you know, we can get into that because there are a lot of arguments across African American cuisine. We can get into mac and cheese. We can get into red velvet cake. We can get into other cobblers. But before we start arguing,
Healthy conversation.
yes. I wanted to ask about the regional differences of Southern cuisine, or African American cuisine, rather.
Yeah. So especially coming from California, what you see out of there is like a lot of barbecue oriented stuff. You do see some instances of soul foods, but they're more into like the Black oriented neighborhoods. So you'll see that stuff in like Oakland, LA, not necessarily some of the like San Francisco or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But out here, you've noticed that things are a lot heavier. It's one of those things. Culturally, I want to say the South. I don't want to call anybody the South.
Watch your words.
They,
This is about to be a healthy conversation.
yeah, that's what we'll say. The South is healthy when it comes to their food, in a sense that they're not counting calories. They're not counting, you know, how much whip this went into that, or how much cheese went into that, how much grease went into that. And so that's what I've noticed the most culturally, as far as the variations that you see from like here versus California, or for instance, our location. I have a second location in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a 4 times James Beard nominee and Gregory Collier running our kitchen there. And getting into that aspect of Creole soul food and different things like that. But he's going the more of the upper echelon and creativity aspect. So it's definitely here I've noticed a little more hearty in a sense.
That's a good word.
And then, that's a good word,
Yeah, I'm
right?
watching you.
And then going into, say, northern, like California, West Coast and stuff like that, it's more grilling because they don't even really smoke meat out there. It's more grilling. And so being said that, that's probably the primary differences that I've seen so far.
We also have the Carolinas where we have low country boil. Since we are in Texas, we have a huge Mexican American influence.
Yeah, I was about to get into that.
Yeah, please do.
I mean, you see charro beans on our table. You see tortillas on our table. You're going to see salsa. You're going to see guacamole on that same table. I did not know we were different until I left here. And then I tried to get home as quickly as I could. Because I was like, first I was like, where's your HEB? That was the number one question.
That's question number one.
Question number one, And then the next was like, where do I get good Tex-Mex from? Because you'll see Tex-Mex on our table. So you'll see the barbecue, like I said, you'll see the tortillas, you'll see the carne guisada, you'll see a lot of that on Black tables because of just our culture and where we're from. And I have never known anything different until I go outside my area and my region and had different food.
Adrian Miller, you wanted to add on to that?
Just real quick. So for the sake of research, I ate my way through the country. So I went to like 150 soul food restaurants in 35 cities in 15 states. And what I noticed in terms of differences is there's a template for soul food. So in some parts of the country, you have different preferences for greens, for example. Some places going to be about collards. Other places going to be about mustard greens or turnip combination. You see different types of cornbreads. Like some place will be a corn muffin instead of a slice, or another place may be a corn cake or hush puppies, things like that. The type of hot sauce varies. And then I've noticed a lot of variation in the type of fish that's preferred. Some places are catfish, other places are whiting. Some place might be porgy. So I've seen those kind of differences.
And I think that's a lot to do with regional, right? Like what you have access to.
Right.
And, and as you know, us Black people, we creative.
Right. But what's interesting is, though, even when Black people migrate to a place where that thing is not available, they still have a preference for it. And eventually the market catches up and provides that. So,
well, I think the first healthy conversation we should have is about cornbread. Do you put sugar in it or do you not? Chef VickieV.
You are our future.
yes.
There's no wrong answer, really.
Me, typically, when I make my cornbread, I add a little bit of sugar, but sometimes, most of the time, I will add honey instead of sugar.
I was gonna say I do the same thing actually. It gets a little bit of sugar. It's like a half a cup, and then I mean, big. Like I said, I've been in Texas for a while, right?
Healthy.
That sounds like a corn cake.
I've gained 40 pounds since I've been in Texas in the last 10 years.
Healthy 40 pounds.
Yeah, healthy 40 pounds. But yeah, that honey aspect for sure. And generally in our house, it's more of the buttermilk variety.
So then you have to add the sugar.
Exactly, to counteract. Exactly.
Right. And what I think historically happened is, because you see a lot of, first of all, this is a big dividing line between Southern and soul. Most soul food recipes for cornbread have some sugar. But I think there's a historical reason for that. In wealthier families, and a lot of this depends on access, if you're using freshly ground milled white corn, that had natural sweetness to it. So adding sugar didn't make much sense. But when you started getting the industrially milled yellow cornmeal, bland, I think cooks just said, hey, I'm going to sweeten this up a little bit. So.
Adrian Lipscombe, do you add sugar, honey?
Sugar.
Sugar. Okay.
Like,
all right.
No other sugar, honey butter, just depending on where I'm doing. And, sometimes there's jalapenos in there. Sometimes there's cheese. It depends on the situation. It really does.
Okay. I like that answer. All correct answers, by the way. It's great. You touched on something a little bit, Adrian Miller, about where spices come from and access to different ingredients. So where have a lot of the traditional ingredients that African Americans and enslaved people have used, where have those come from?
So soul food is really a coming together of West Africa, Western Europe, and the Americas. So it's a rich mix of those things. So some of the ingredients that have come from West Africa: okra, black-eyed peas, a type of sesame seed they call bene, hibiscus, watermelon. All of these things come from West Africa. And then we've got different things that come from Europe. But almost all of our corn dishes and a lot of the native, local things we owe to Native Americans for teaching us how to cook these things. So that is a huge influence. And in my book, and it's controversial to some, I argue that barbecue is Native American in its foundation. And later colonizing Europeans and enslaved Africans put their own spin on it, and it gets to the pit barbecue that we love today. So
Healthy conversation. Yeah.
Did you want to add on to that?
I have some arguments with that about where barbecue comes from, and that's like a whole nother segment. We don't even have to get up into that. That's like a whole nother segment. But I do agree about where our food has come from. I don't know if I'll blow your mind, but collard greens are not black. They don't belong to just us. They're from the Mediterranean area.
Mind is blown.
Mind is blown, right? So, and in my research, but also Africa is included as part of the Mediterranean. Part of Africa is, but it is from the Mediterranean area. And in that type of scape, you see that Italians had collard greens and how it spreads. You have Brazilian dishes that their national dishes, collard greens. So, we have such a scope on what belongs to us and we hold on tight to that. But culturally, it's immersed. And so as it traveled, we may have gotten it. It may have been wild also. It's a part of the Brassica family and they're very promiscuous. So it could have came over a long time ago before any African stepped on this land.
And also just access to ingredients. Where does that come from? Because the prevailing story is that enslaved people got the scraps. Yeah. But I mean, enslaved people also had gardens.
yeah. So the whole scrap story is just one part of the story, food story, and that comes from the hog killings that happened in the fall when hundreds of pigs would be slaughtered and processed and preserved for later use through the winter. And so when you kill a bunch of hogs, the internal organs and other things was ephemeral, right? And so often enslaved people got access to that. But the thing is, white people were eating the same stuff. So this whole idea that the leftovers and scraps, the master's leftovers, trash, and all that kind of, that narrative that this was wholly created for black people just doesn't really hold true. Now, enslaved people did eat that, but then if you go back and look at culinary practices in West Africa, Africans were eating internal organs. So that is not something that was new to in the American experience. So I just think there needs to be a deeper look at a lot of this stuff. But yeah, enslaved people gardened, hunted, fished, foraged, did all kinds of things to supplement the meager diet that they got. And for those who don't know, on the large plantations, once a week, enslaved people got controlled amounts of food. 5 pounds of some starch, usually cornmeal, but it could be sweet potatoes or rice. A couple of pounds of smoked meat, could be fish, beef, or pork, whatever was cheapest, and a jug of molasses. That's all they got. And so they had to create food systems in order to survive.
And Marcus is our lone brewer on the panel. You've done a lot of research as well about the history of brewing. Where does that come from?
Beer's black. Beer comes from Africa. For those that are unfamiliar now, going into the European versions of beer, they definitely did refine those processes and make beer a lot better. But fermentation, period, pretty much came from Africa in the sense of beverage.
Okay. I wanted to... Oh, we have a question? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, one quick question. My name is Ken. I wanted to ask about, as we were having the conversation about seasoning and about collard greens being Mediterranean, can you speak to the differences, perhaps, if you believe there were, in terms of how African Americans season those greens? Is that Mediterranean, or is that very much other things?
So I've been doing a lot of research about collard greens, and one of the oldest recipes that I ran across, and it was in old German, and I tried to get my husband to read it to me, and it ended up being some of the ingredients. So I have a recipe in Bryant Terry's book is a collard green recipe, and it happened to be that a lot of the ingredients that I use today, presently, was in this 15th century recipe, which kind of just blew my mind. I wasn't really expecting it. But I do know as the collard greens traveled, it did change. So I'm going to go a little history. So as collard greens traveled further up north, it turned into cabbage. So they're all part of the family. And like I said, this is another conversation. But as you're talking about seasoning, it did change as it changes here in the United States. Some people add vinegar. Some people are really sacrilegious and add sugar. And healthy conversation. You know, some people use pork, some people use turkey necks. Yeah, turkey necks, the smoked turkey necks, smoked turkey necks. You know, so it really has just depends on where you are and where you're from. And what the source of ingredients that you had in there. Some people add Scotch bonnet. Some people make it a little bit spicy. Down here, we add a little. I know I do. Do y'all add a little spice, a little red pepper flake, or a little bit to it? Yeah, yeah. Come on. And so I believe the spice variation has changed, but there are some things that have stuck, or at least we have come back to.
Without revealing your entire recipe, what were some of the ingredients that were the same?
I use nigella seeds in my recipe. I also use ginger. I use ginger, and oh my God, what else was in? It's a long recipe. I don't even. It's in the middle of the book, so if you open the book, it'll it'll pop open. It'll be there. I do use a little bit of vinegar as well in the book, and I'll be more than happy to give anybody that recipe.
Oh, excellent. I'm sure there are quite a few people.
What do you use?
In my collard greens, well, like they said, I would like smoke some turkey, and then I'll put them inside of the greens while they're in the roaster, and then I would add the juice from the turkey. I would add the juice inside of there, and then I would add some chicken bouillon and some beef bouillon, and then some complete seasoning and
All right.
a tinge of vinegar.
And you know, you brought up something really interesting about a teach and how you season. How did you learn to cook, Chef VickieV?
Well, it started when we lived in Houston, and I loved to cook in the kitchen with my mom and my grandma. So, that's when I sat down with my mom and I told her that wanted to become a chef, and she said, "Okay, well, I got someone for you." And then, and so she called that person, and um, he was like, "Yeah, I'm willing to work with you." And so we moved down here, and since ever since when we moved down here, he started working with me. And then a few years like 2 years ago, he coded me as a junior executive sous chef. And then that's when I decided to start my own business. And so when I started my own business, I started expanding it even more. And like I work with someone named Miss Kiati. She gives me like I'm her dessert chef, you can call it, which means like when she wants me to do like a dessert table, she calls me and she'll pay me to do it.
It's amazing. I can tell you I was not doing that at 12. But you said teach. How else do you measure? Do you measure by the handful? Do you measure by the eyeball? Or do you use cups?
Well, it depends on what it is, but most of the time when I do desserts, I measure with cups because I want it to taste hot. I exactly want it. But when I cook for other people, I do cups. But when I'm cooking for myself, it depends. Like if I'm cooking for my family, sometimes I'll eyeball it, like if I know the recipe by heart, or sometimes I'll use cups. But it just depends.
It depends on the recipe. It depends on how you're feeling. Depends on how what you learned from. You said your mother and grandma.
Yes.
Yes. So it's interesting. Chef VickieV talks about that because that is a long history within the Black community of passing down recipes through an oral tradition. It's an oral history. Let's go to Adrian Lipscombe first. Those recipes. First, did you learn to cook like that?
No other way was to learn from my mother and my grandmother. And we have this thing where you learn orally. So you had to be there, you had to have your hands in it, you had to feel it. But also when you moved out, right? We have this thing. If you, and this happened to me when I first moved out, I decided to make the known sour cream pound cake for my loved one, and I forgot the recipe. And we couldn't call home and ask, because you call home and ask, they literally would be, well, it looks like you haven't been home enough.
Ooh.
And that was like a trigger to be like, you gotta go home. So even now, my sister, if she calls me for a tablespoon or a teaspoon, I'm like, I ain't giving it to you, girl. It's time for you to come home, because it's that point where you get to go home and you make that food with your family and you make it with your grandmother, because you're going to get these stories, right? And they're going to come differently, or they may come the same, but they're going to be like ingrained in you. So I teach my kids, they watch me do it. And, and I say really good luck, because I think I'm going to get a lot of phone calls when they get a little older.
We have another question.
Hi, I am Ariane. They call me Chef A. I'm the people's chef. And I see you, Chef Vickie, and I was 7 when I started. So my question to you is, how long do you think you're going to go? And if you want to, I do partnerships and collaborations in youth empowerment. So I'm interested in maybe partnering with you or anybody on the panel. I do food history and food diversity, which is what we're all talking about here. So let me know it.
Well, me personally, I think that if I keep like believing in myself and find like more recipes and more people to collaborate with, it'll take me farther than what I think it will take me. Like, I want to like at least be able to do my business until I'm able to move out and be on my own and be independent on my own, and not have to call my mom and be like, hey, can you come cook for me? Or
Are you talking about me, Chef VickieV?
Or call her and be like, what's the recipe for this? I want to be able to move out and know all of my recipes by heart without needing help or having to call someone.
Can I add something on what Chef Adrian was talking about?
Yeah.
So sometimes you do have elders who are in a sharing mood, kinda.
They don't
What
give
they'll
all of
do
it.
is they'll give you the recipe and they'll purposely leave something out,
That's my grandma.
and that's what we call a lesser P. So
But
That's my
you know,
grandma for sure. My
but you know-
grandma's 94, and she will for sure, with plenty of recipes, leave at least one thing out because she don't want it to taste the same. So we have
Yeah.
a family barbecue.
Yeah.
We have a family barbecue recipe that's 70 plus years old, and I have this recipe, and she reminds me every time I'm making it. Well, you don't have that extra ingredient in it, huh? And I'm just like, hey, yeah. And that's literally my 94-year-old grandma is petty in that way.
But she said petty. But there's history behind that, right? Like
No,
there's
100%.
there's history behind that if we talk about the enslaved, right?
Yep.
So if we talk about the enslaved, you're talking about women that were the house, the mamas of the house, and when they had children or had women that were going to move on with the master's child in that house, what they would do, and this was around the time cookbooks or family cookbooks were coming out, they were taking the recipes of the enslaved. And so what they would do would not give them the entire recipe. So their daughter, the master's daughter, wouldn't have that recipe. She needed to take the daughter of the enslaved to be able to make that recipe. And so that has carried on, and it has carried on to y'all church cookbooks. Let me tell you, my grandma is the editor of the church cookbook, and she did 3 cookbooks. I know when I have to read the recipe, because I know Miss Sally Mae has left off a teaspoon of that leavening and that baking powder to make that cookie. So, we see it. I can still see it in old Black church cookbooks. You can see that there's a recipe because they don't want you to have the exact recipe.
And I think it goes like generational too, because I've done that with people
Oh,
too
yeah.
at this point.
Yeah.
Wait, which recipe?
I got friends hit me up for recipes and different. Okay, so and this goes into the generational thing of Black families, right? So there's certain dishes that your grandmother, mother, etc. are not going to let you make. So being that our family, only one person has been, 2 people, excuse me, have been able to make the mac and cheese since I can remember. My Aunt Audrey and my mom. So one of my purposes as an adult was, I'm going to get this mac and cheese recipe down, and I'm going to be the new person for mac and cheese. So mind you, 38 years old. So 2 years ago, my mom relinquished the mac and cheese. She relinquished the greens, and then my dad also relinquished barbecuing, which I handle most of the smoking now because he then came down and seen the difference between smoking and grilling. So even to the point now, my dad done upgraded his grill to a smoker.
Yeah.
But being said that, even I have friends call me to this day and it's like, hey, can I get that mac and cheese recipe? I'm for sure leaving out 2 cheeses out of it because I don't want it to taste the same.
So I'm just
Exactly.
wondering though, in order to be able to make the mac and cheese, do you have to show 2 supporting affidavits from your?
I know, right? No, I mean, it took a couple of trials and errors, at that point. And then, it's one of those things like you ask when you come in the house who made the mac and cheese.
Yeah.
And so, I had to put a little chip on my shoulder when it came to that because now I can make the mac and cheese for the whole family.
Yeah, you don't just let anybody make the mac and cheese. It's one person, maybe 2 people in a family. Chef VickieV, is that you? Do you make the mac and cheese for your family? Yeah, okay. I figured. We have another question?
It's not so much as a question, just piggyback off Chef VickieV. I'm her mom. But me and my mom taught her how to cook, but everything you all are saying is validated. Because when I was growing up, I used to ask my mom, well, what's the recipe for peach cobbler? And she'd act like she'd have amnesia. Girl, I don't know. I don't measure. I just put it in there. But as soon as she became a sous chef, recipes was just coming everywhere, from the buttermilk pie, the peach cobbler. So everything that she makes, it holds very dear to her because those are recipes that my mom handed down to her that I never even had. I learned from my mom, but my mom never gave me those recipes, but VickieV has.
Mom, that's because I'm special.
Grandbaby always gets everything. Yeah. Let's jump right into another question.
Hi, my name is Evan. I wanted to ask if it's typical to leave out a piece of a recipe, do you think that actually makes it so that the recipes evolve and get better over time, or at least different so that like people own their own recipes or it becomes better generation over generation?
No. No.
It's pure spite, man.
Yeah, it's out of pure spite.
It is petty. I'm mad, and I had a situation. So, like at my house, there's a very famous sour cream pound cake. And this is a cake that my grandmother has made since I can remember. And this is the cake. When you come in the house, you say, hi, Nana, but you ain't looking at her. You're looking at the cake, like you're making sure the cake is there because you're going to get a big slice and you're going to get a piece in foil to go home to. And I know she's going to kill me for telling this story, but she made it one time and it wasn't the same. And I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, something ain't right. But I didn't say nothing. I ate that cake and I went home. But I got a phone call by the time I walked in the door from my grandma said, what's wrong with that cake? And I was like, dang, my mom. And that was the first time I had ever, and I was in my 30s. This was the first time I ever went to bat with my grandmother, going back and forth on ingredients, like verbally saying if it's a quarter teaspoon or what. It was like shocking to me because she knew that cake was right. But we found out where we were wrong. And you know what she told me? Make that cake and bring it over. And I brought it over the next day. And, she's sitting there on the phone acting like I'm proud. I'm bringing this cake in. I'm proud. She's like, sit it down right over there. And I stayed for maybe like 10 minutes and I left. She called me back and she said, you're right. She missed it. That I was right. So guess what happened after that? My cousin called me and said, what did you do? And it was the whole thing that, I had to make the cake and take it back over. You had to make it again and take it back over there because it looks at this point of like, you're next to take that cake because now you've made it better than me. Sorry, Grandma, I don't think I make it better than you. I'm so sorry, this disclaimer. But she knows that this cake will be okay in my hands. And I think, to your question of leaving out an ingredient, it makes us use our senses And like we know something's not right when we're making this. And I think they get a kick out of it. I really do. I think they laugh and they know they're never gonna get it. And we have to guess it sometimes. But yeah, it does, but you are right. It does evolve the recipe as recipes have evolved because of access to food and new foods that are coming out and new flavors that are coming out. But they're petty.
Can I add something onto that
Please do.
question? Me personally, if I leave out an ingredient, I gotta start over. Like there's no way I can make something and I leave out an ingredient and I taste it and be like, oh, that's good. But then I keep tasting it and then I taste a missing ingredient and I'm like, something's not right. Like when I make my greens, I messed up once because I added too much salt by accident. So I called my mom and I was like, Mom, what can I add into the greens to take away some of the salt? She said, well, add a little bit of vinegar. And so I did. And I was like, oh yeah, vinegar helps. So now I add vinegar onto my greens.
Learning on the fly. I wanted to ask about, since we do share these recipes orally, when they are written down, either a church cookbook or a national cookbook, what's the process of getting those exact measurements? And for some for some recipes that are written that maybe don't have exact measurements, those recipes are almost written in a shorthand. They're almost coded. So if you're not familiar with Southern cuisine or Southern cooking, you're going to be lost. What, Adrian Miller? Do you want to start?
Oh, well, my answer is we'll try. I just hire a recipe developer. That's what I do.
Yeah.
All right.
I sit there, she puts it in her hand, I take that teaspoon and I pour it out of her hand if you're like trying to get those measurements. Like it's very difficult. Or I do pastry, so weighing it out so at least I can get it in grams or something of that nature, and then try to decipher it into being something that I could use. But it's really interesting that a lot of our recipes have really developed over time from recipes that were in newspapers and that were on the back of extracts, like Adam's extracts. And so those recipes have evolved as well. But when we're watching our loved ones make these and they're like, I don't know, it's a pinch of this, it's a pinch of that, I'm literally there with a spoon, like, put it in this so I can like write it down. Because, now we're getting to the age where our elders wrote in cursive and our young ones can't read the cursive. So, luckily enough, I was one. I'm not going to age myself, but I can read cursive. But we're getting to that point where we're losing the handwriting, we're losing the style of recipes. But recipes like in cookbooks is really important because it has the name of the person. It has the name of the family that donated that recipe for that church cookbook. And that's what I find so interesting, because sometimes there'll be like 6 sweet potato pies in there, and then all those recipes are completely different. And if you try one, it may not be right, but you may try another one and you're like, this is going to be the one that my family is going to continue to use. And it was by Miss Bertha. So those are things that I find really significant about recipes.
Can I make a really quick plea? If you are creating a cookbook like that, go a step further and add a little small paragraph. We call them head notes in the business, to give some context for that recipe. Talk about the person who made it, or when it was served, why it was a family favorite. That means so much to those of us who are reading these recipes out of context and much later. It just adds a dimension to that food. So that's my small plea.
And then for somebody who's not a part of that community, and I mean just directly of family or the church, when does adaptation and experimentation become, for lack of a better term, copyright infringement or stealing something?
Yeah. So technically, anytime you change one word of something, it's no longer copyrighted. Right. So, it's only that exact tangible expression of the idea that is protected intellectually. Now, if you start fudging with it, then it becomes something else. Now, out of courtesy, if I change a recipe a little bit, I write down adapted by or inspired by, and I give a shout out to that person. But technically it's only that whatever that expression literally is, that's the only thing that's intellectually protected.
So again, you can change it to a teaspoon to a half teaspoon, and that's a new recipe. So it's not copyrighted.
Okay.
Can I add something onto that?
Yes.
When I make peach cobbler, my grandma's recipe says to add 1.5 cup, but I do 1 cup because I feel if I add only 1.5 cup, it's not too sweet. Like, it's not sweet enough. And when I make my peach cobbler, I add juice, like add extra juice in it. So since I add extra juice, I add extra sugar. But that's all I have to say.
You're like, come on, what else do you do?
Anybody writing that down?
Yes, yeah, please give me tips because I'm the adult that calls my mom for what's the recipe? Please help me. But Marcus, I wanted to kind of segue over to you because you have a wonderful project called Black is Beautiful for your stout where you share the recipe with other breweries. I wanted you, could you talk about that a little bit and how it started?
Yeah, definitely. So Black is Beautiful started in 2020 at the height of what we were looking at dealing with Civil Rights Movement 2.0. So this is at the peak of Breonna Taylor's murder, George Floyd murder, and I was actually on my way to Dallas and was listening to a conversation of Breonna Taylor's mom speak about the actions of her finding out how her daughter was killed. And that conversation brought me to tears. I'm raising 2 young daughters myself. But even then, we're in peak COVID time. I'm very, and it doesn't seem like this because I'm up here chatting and all this fun stuff, but I am very much the introverted individual. Like, I'll leave this event here and be dead to the world, knocked out. But being said that, I wasn't going to the protests or anything like that. But being said that, again, my grandma was 94, you know, her mom was a slave, and we have very rich history in our family about giving back. My grandma owns a church in Compton and, you know, all of these different things. And so I sat here and was like, okay, my daughters look 20 years from now. Like, what was daddy doing at this time? Oh, he wasn't doing anything. And I didn't want that experience. And so being that I'm in beer, you know, I'm limited of the things that I can do, but obviously I can do something. So I was going to go ahead and do a standalone beer and donate that money to a local organization. But I was talking to a friend from Austin and he was like, you should turn this into a collaboration. And I was like, you know what? You're right. So what Black is Beautiful was a collaboration amongst breweries to brew a stout that was created here in San Antonio by us at Weathered Souls, and then donate 100% of those proceeds to organizations, charities, foundations that support social justice reform, equality, and police brutality reform. So we are 3 years from now from the original Black is Beautiful brewing, and we've had about 1,500 breweries participate, have raised a little over $5 million in support of social justice reform. Thank you. And had, you know, all 50 states, 30 plus countries participate. And it's, you know, one of the largest drivers in food and beverage history in support of social justice reform. So it's done fantastic things for the community, for beer, for food, beverage, but also a lot for Black people. And so it was dope to sit here and talk to Adrian because she was one of the recipients of funds in previous years from Black is Beautiful. And so, you know, one of the main drivers of what Black is Beautiful was about was supporting your local community, supporting those individuals, but then also the long-term work. So, you know, it's always nice that, and we see this a lot, you know, and not to call anybody out, but we see this a lot dealing with others, right? They donate their money and then they think, okay, we've donated our money. All right, we've given back, we've supported, that's that. But we know that that's only temporary. And so one of the things that we've asked for is the long-term work. So there's been breweries that still participate to this day that brew the beer. We're actually revitalizing it. So dealing with beer in general, there's not a lot of me in beer. Beer is 99.9% Caucasian. There's over 9,000 breweries in the United States, and there's less than 80 of them that are even remotely part Black owned. And so to look at those numbers, those are completely staggering, especially when we look at where beer comes from. one of the things that I found out through beer, and it's interesting because my grandma has been very anti-alcohol my entire life. Oh, you guys don't need to drink, that type of stuff. And to find out, my grandma used to brew during Prohibition. She used to brew and distill, and her dad used to brew and distill during Prohibition. And then to even find out even further, her grandmother's maiden name is Brewer. And we know where the majority of slaves used to get their last names was based off of their trades and the things that they did. And so that's another point of dealing with beer. You guys hear about the Thomas Jeffersons and the George Washingtons, and they used to make beer. No, they didn't. Their slaves used to make beer, and they took credit for it. And so you look at those things, and it's one of those things that have been generational with me, and I had no idea. And so to this day, one of the things that we still talk about, and my grandma, so the story is, to be quick, my grandma was 14 years old, and she was brewing some hooch, and this individual kept asking for some. So she grew kind of spiteful, gave him some of the concentrated mash. He was doing construction, and he ended up falling off the roof. So the man injured himself. My grandma prayed to the Lord above, please don't let the police come, because you can imagine how scared a 14-year-old black woman is in Topeka, Kansas during the 1920s. And so pretty much she prays to the Lord that the police do not take her away. If the police don't come, then she'll never have anything to do with alcohol again. And so the police never came, and she had never had anything to do with alcohol ever again. Even to this day, asking her for the original recipe, and she'll tell you she doesn't remember it. And I guarantee you, my grandma is still very sharp that she remembers at least part of this recipe, but she will not give it to me just because she's going to 100% keep her promise. But being said that, one of the things that we've transitioned into, because again, we talk about the long work, the long-term work. And so this year we launched the Harriet Baskerville Incubation Program. And so that's a 501c3 that will be running through our Charlotte, North Carolina location. And what the purpose of that is, in her namesake, it's called the Harriet Baskerville Incubation Program, which was named after my grandma, is to promote the growth of Black ownership in beer. And so it'll be a 100% incubation program that will come in. You'll even work with financing, resources to get money, SBA loan officers, but even getting into working with partners on how to save money, et cetera, working with Jägermeister, who might not be beer, but they've been a company in beverage for many of years. So working with sustainability. So once you're open, how to stay open, but even taking it a step further and going into the education of beer as well. So that's something that we'll be actually launching our first cohort next month, which I'm really excited about, as this is literally going to change the dynamics of what we've been talking about for beer. I can have 4 people go ahead and if they were to open a brewery within the next year, that's already a 60% increase in the amount of ownership that we currently have. And so when we talk about change, you want to make those changes that are actually there, right? And so that's one of the main goals for me. But then even then with Black is Beautiful, again, I always get into stuff and start doing more than what I need to. So got approached with launching a National Black Brewers Association. You hear the term, you want to see it at the table. But one of the things that's important to me is for the Black communities is that we build our own tables. Why ask to be at a different table with somebody else?
Mm-hmm. You touched on quite a few things there.
Yeah.
Quite a few things. We are coming to the end of the hour, but I just wanted to touch base on, I think the heart of what you said is legacy.
100% legacy.
Yeah.
You look at, again, my grandmother, her grandfather, and et cetera. But even then, my kids participate in brew days. We have an International Women's Brew Day every year where we collaborate with a local girls chapter of beer because, again, women are misrepresented in beer as well. And so being that I'm raising 2 young, very Black women, my goal is to create spaces for them where they can take my business when I'm done and continue on. And so the 6-year-old, she's participated in every brew day for the last 5 years. So yeah, it's about building legacy. It's about building growth. If they didn't have school tomorrow, they'd be here sitting here watching because they're very aware of Black is Beautiful and the work that Daddy does in the community. So for us, it's always going to be about building legacy and a future for my kids.
Did you want to add on to that?
Question: you gonna give them those recipes, right?
Some of them.
Some of them.
Okay, yeah.
Some of them.
Actually, so we just did. What's the last holiday we just had? There was some holiday that
Memorial
just
Day?
happened.
Memorial
Yeah,
Day.
Memorial Day. So, okay, I have a friend from California, and he knows that I thoroughly cook. So he hits me up. Hey, what are you cooking for Memorial Day? So he drives all the way down from Houston to make sure that he comes to the house to eat. But and this is one of those things where you were talking about soul food, putting your passion into it. I get up at 5 a.m. and start my food. My greens go for 8 hours. And so being said that, this is me putting my passion into the food the entire day. And I don't let anybody else in the kitchen when I'm cooking. It's just me. But this year, that 6-year-old, she got to make that mac and cheese from scratch while daddy was over here cooking. So she sat on the stool and I provided every ingredient for her. Hey, add this much this. And she sat there. And mind you, she's 6, so you got to stir that roux. She was tired of stirring the roux. Daddy, I'm tired of stirring. Baby, you got to keep stirring. You can't let that bubble. So, but, she's starting to get into that, too, of enjoying the cooking. So, yeah, turned out fantastic. Daddy was sitting right there.
To wrap this up, I wanted to ask each of you, what do you think the legacy of African-American cuisine will be? Adrian Lipscombe, let's start with you.
Dang. You saw I didn't give you no eye contact, right? The base of American food is African American food. So it will be here and it's going to evolve and it's going to get stronger. And hopefully we'll see it as we are seeing it on everybody's table. But again, making our own tables as well.
I think it's ingenuity. That's what a lot of soul food's about. And we're seeing it today. Some of the most creative things we're seeing right now is in the vegan and vegetarian space with soul food. And so I'm really excited about soul food's future. And the other thing we're seeing is contact with other cultures. So you're seeing a lot of fusion stuff developing. So I'm excited. But one word I would say is ingenuity.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. You're seeing a lot of what the base culinary experience used to be, and a lot of these new chefs are coming in, switching things up. So I think innovation is going to be big towards the future, while still kind of maintaining some of the base structure and history of what we've seen over the course of the years.
Chef VickieV, you are the legacy.
I think that. Wait, what was the question again?
What do you think the legacy of soul food and African American food will be?
I think it will be like being able to like see different people from different cultures like make different foods for Juneteenth and like seeing them celebrate it differently than what we do. Because when we celebrate it, it's like we do, like they said, the barbecue. But when other cultures celebrate it, they do like having parties and having beer and
yeah. We do have food and sweet treats in the afterglow. And I believe, Chef VickieV, you have some sweet treats that you're going to share with everybody.
yes.
What's on the menu?
So the menu today is peach cobbler, banana pudding, red velvet cupcakes, and now when y'all go out there, they're gonna be different colors because they're the colors of Juneteenth. But they're still red velvet.
But they taste good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They're the recipe of red velvet, but they're just different colors.
Okay, that's
And
great.
then we have Juneteenth cups, which is it's like red, white, and blue. So the icing is white, and then I think the bottom layer is blue, and then the top layer is red. So that's
They all sound delicious. We also have some goodness, I've been told, from All Things Gourmet. So I want to thank everybody for coming out here tonight. Once again, happy Juneteenth.